Chapter 8 The Chateau D'If. The commissary of police, as he traversed the antechamber, made a sign to two gendarmes, who placed themselves one on Dante's right and the other on his left. A door that communicated with the Palais de Justice was opened, and they traversed a long range of gloomy corridors, whose appearance might have made even the boldest shudder. The Palais de Justice communicated with the prison, a sombre edifice that from its gaping windows looks on the clock tower of the House rising before it. After numberless windings, Dante saw an iron door and wicket. The commissary knocked thrice, every blow seeming to Dante as if struck on his heart. The door opened. The two gendarmes gently pushed him forward, and the door closed with a loud sound behind him. The air he inhaled was no longer pure, but thick and mephitic. He was in prison. He was conducted to a tolerably neat chamber, but grated and barred, and its appearance, therefore, did not greatly alarm him. Besides, the words of Villefort, who seemed to interest himself so much, resounded still in his ears like a promise of hope. It was 4 o'clock when Dante was placed in this chamber. It was, as we have said, the 1st of March, and the prisoner was soon buried in darkness. The obscurity augmented the acuteness of his hearing. At the slightest sound he rose and hastened to the door, convinced they were about to liberate him. But the sound died away, and Dante sank again into his seat. At last, about 10 o'clock, and just as Dante began to despair, sounds were again heard and seemed to appear to his chamber. Steps echoed in the corridor and stopped at his door. A key turned in the lock. The bolts creaked, the massy oaken door flew open, and a flood of light from 2 torches pervaded the apartment. By the torchlight, Dante saw the glittering sabres and carbines of 4 gendarmes. He had advanced at first, but stopped at sight of this fresh accession of force. "Are you come to fetch me?" asked he. "Yes," replied a gendarme. "By the orders of the deputy of King's procureur?" "I believe so." "Well," said Dante, "I am ready to follow you." The conviction that they came from M. de Villefort relieved all Dante's apprehensions. He advanced calmly and placed himself in the center of the escort. A carriage waited at the street door. The coachman was in the box, and an exempt seated behind him. "Is this carriage for me?" said Dante. "It is for you," replied the gendarme. Dante was about to speak, but feeling himself urged forward, and having neither the power nor the intention to resist, he mounted the steps, and was in an instant seated inside between 2 gendarmes. The 2 others took their places opposite, and the carriage rolled heavily over the stones. The prisoner glanced at the windows. They were grated. They had changed his prison for another that was conveying him he knew not whither. Through the closed, barred grating, however, Dante saw they were passing through the Rue Cassirer, and by the Quai Saint-Laurent and the Rue Tamaris to the quay. Soon he saw, through the grating of the coach and the railing of the edifice, the gleam of the lights of La Concierge. The carriage stopped. The exempt descended, approached the guardhouse. A dozen soldiers came out and formed themselves in order. Dante saw the reflection of their muskets by the light of the lamps on the quay. "Can all this military force be summoned on my account?" thought he. The exempt opened the door, which was locked, and, without speaking a word, answered Dante's question, for he saw between the ranks of the soldier a passage formed from the carriage to the port. The two gendarmes who were opposite to him descended first. Then he was ordered to alight, and the gendarmes on each side of him followed his example. They advanced toward a boat, which a custom-house officer held near the quay by a chain. The soldiers looked at Dante with an air of stupid curiosity. In an instant he was placed in the stern sheets of the boat, between the gendarmes, whilst the exempt stationed himself at the bow. A shove sent the boat adrift, and 4 sturdy oarsmen impelled it rapidly toward the pylon. At a shout from the boat, the chain that closes the mouth of the port was lowered, and in a second they were outside the harbor. The prisoner's first feeling was joy at again breathing the pure air, for air is freedom, and he eagerly inhaled the fresh breeze that brings on its wings all the unknown scents of the night and the sea. But he soon sighed, for he passed before La Reserve, where he had that morning been so happy, and now through the open windows came the laughter and revelry of a ball. Dante folded his hands, raised his eyes to heaven, and prayed fervently. The boat continued her voyage. They passed the Tête de Moor, were now in front of the lighthouse, and about to double the battery. The maneuver was incomprehensible to Dante. "Whither are you taking me?" asked he. "You will soon know. But still, we are forbidden to give you any explanation." Dante was half a soldier and knew that nothing would be more absurd than to question subordinates who were forbidden to reply, and remained silent. The most vague and wild thoughts passed through his mind. The boat they were in could not make a long voyage. There was no vessel to anchor outside the harbor. He thought perhaps they were going to leave him on some distant point and tell him he was free. He was not bound, nor had they made any attempt to handicap him. This seemed a good augury. Besides, had not the deputy, who had been so kind to him, told him that, provided he did not pronounce the dreaded name of Noirtier, he had nothing to apprehend? Had not Villefort in his presence destroyed the fatal letter, the only proof against him? He waited silently, striking to pierce through the obscurity of the night with his sailor's eye, accustomed to the darkness and distance. They had left the Rue Ratonneau, where the lighthouse stood, on the right, and were now opposite to the Point de Cantillons. His eyesight redoubled its vigor, and it seemed to the prisoner that he could distinguish a female form on the beach, for it was there Mercedes dwelt. How was it that a presentiment did not warn Mercedes her lover was near her? One light alone was visible, and Dante recognized it as coming from the chamber of Mercedes. She was the only being awake in the little colony. A loud cry could be heard by her. He did not utter it. A false shame restrained him. What would his guards think if they heard him shout like a madman? He remained silent, his eyes fixed upon the light. The boat went on, but the prisoner thought only of Mercedes. A rising ground hid the light. Dante turned and perceived that they had got out to sea. Whilst Lai had been absorbed in thought, they had hoisted the sail, and the bark was borne onward by the wind. In spite of his repugnance to address the guards, Dante turned to the nearest gendarme, and, taking his hand, "Comrade," said he, "I adjure you, as a Christian and a soldier, to tell me where we are going. I am Captain Dante, a loyal Frenchman, though accused of I know not what treason. Tell me where you are conducting me, and I promise you, on my honor, I will submit to my fate." The gendarme scratched his ear and looked irresolutely at his companion, who returned for answer a sign that said, "I see no great harm in telling him now." And the gendarme replied, "You're a native of Marseille and a sailor, and yet you do not know where you're going?" "On my honor, I have no idea." "And you cannot guess?" "I cannot." "That is impossible." "I swear to you it is true. Tell me, I entreat." "But my orders." "Your orders do not forbid your telling me what I must know in 10 minutes, in half an hour, or an hour. You will merely spare me ages of uncertainty. I ask you if you were my friend. You see I cannot escape, even if I intended. Unless you are blind, or have never been outside the harbor, you must know." "I do not." "Look around you, then." Dante rose and looked forward. When he saw rise within 100 yards of him the black and frowning rock on which stand the Chateau D'If, this strange mass, this prison around which such deep terror reigns, this fortress that for 300 years had filled Marseille with its gloomy traditions, appearing thus suddenly to Dante, who was not thinking about it, seemed to him what the scaffold seems to the condemned prisoner. "The Chateau D'If?" cried he. "What are we going there for?" The gendarme smiled. "I am not going there to be imprisoned," said Dante. "It is only used for political prisoners. I have committed no crime. Are there any magistrate or judges at the Chateau D'If?" "There are only," said the gendarme, "a governor, a garrison, turnkeys, and good thick walls. Come, do not look so astonished, or you will make me think you are laughing at me in return for my good nature." Dante pressed the gendarme's hand as though he would crush it. "You think, then," said he, "that I am conducted to the chateau to be imprisoned there?" "It is probable, but there is no occasion to squeeze so hard. Without any further formality?" "All the formalities have been gone through, in spite of Monsieur de Villefort's promises." I do not know what Monsieur de Villefort promised you," said the gendarme, "but I know we are taking you to the Chateau D'If. But what are you doing? Help, comrades, help!" By a rapid movement, which the gendarme's practised eye had perceived, Dante sprang forward to precipitate himself into the sea, but 4 vigorous arms seized him as his feet quitted the flooring of the boat. He fell back, foaming with rage. "Good," said the gendarme, placing his knee on his chest. "This is the way you keep your word as a sailor. Believe soft-spoken gentlemen again. Hark ye, my friend, I have disobeyed my first order, but I will not disobey the second, and if you move, I lodge a bullet in your brain." And he levelled his carbine at Dante, who felt the muzzle touch his head. For a moment the idea of struggling crossed his mind, and of thus ending the unexpected evil that had overtaken him. But just because it was unexpected, he believed it would not last long, and he bethought him of Villefort's promise, and, besides, death in a boat from the hand of a gendarme seemed too repulsive. He remained motionless, but gnashing his teeth with fury. At this moment a violent shock made the bark tremble. One of the sailors leaped on the rock which the bow had just touched. A cord creaked as it ran through a pulley, and Dante guessed they were at the end of the voyage and mooring the boat. His guardians, taking hold of his arms and collar, forced him to rise and land, and dragged him toward the steps that lead to the gate of the fortress, whilst the exempt followed, armed with a carbine and a bayonet. Dante made no resistance. He was dazed and tottering like a drunken man. He saw soldiers who stationed themselves on the sides. He felt himself forced up fresh stairs. He perceived he passed through a door, and the door closed behind him. But all this as mechanically as through a mist, nothing distinctly. He did not even see the sea, that terror of prisoners who regard its expanse with the awful feeling that they cannot cross it. They halted for a minute, during which he strove to collect his thoughts. He looked around. He was in a square court surrounded by 4 high walls. He heard the measured tread of sentinels, and as they passed before the light reflected on the walls from 2 or 3 lamps in the interior of the fortress, he saw the barrels of their muskets shine. They waited upward of 10 minutes, certain Dante could not escape. The gendarmes released him. They seemed awaiting orders. The orders arrived. "Where's the prisoner?" said a voice. "Here," replied the gendarmes. "Let him follow me. I am going to conduct him to his room." "Go," said the gendarmes, pushing Dante. The prisoner followed his conductor, who led him into a room almost underground, whose bare and reeking walls seemed as though impregnated with tears. A lamp placed on a stool, its wick floating in stinking fat, illumined the apartment faintly, and showed Dante the features of his conductor, an under jailer, ill-clothed, and of sullen appearance. "Here is your chamber for tonight," said he. "It is late, and Monsieur le Governor is asleep. Tomorrow, perhaps, when he awakes and has examined the orders concerning you, he may change you. In the meantime, there are bread, water, and fresh straw, and that is all a prisoner can wish for. Good night." And before Dante could open his mouth, before he had noticed where the jailer placed his bread or where the water was, before he had glanced toward the corner where the straw was, the jailer disappeared, taking with him the lamp, whose dull rays showed him the dripping walls of his prison. Dante was alone in darkness and in silence, mute as the vault above him, and cold as the shadows that fell on his burning forehead. With the first dawn of day, the jailer returned, with orders to leave Dante where he was. He found the prisoner in the same position, as if fixed there by an iron hand, his eyes swollen with weeping. He had passed the night standing, and without sleep. The jailer advanced. Dante appeared not to perceive him. He touched him on the shoulder. Edmond started. "Have you not slept?" said the jailer. "I do not know," replied Dante. The jailer stared. "Are you hungry?" continued he. "I do not know." "Do you wish for anything?" "I wish to see the governor." The jailer shrugged his shoulders and left the chamber. Dante followed him with his eyes, and stretched forth his hands towards the open door, but the door closed. All his emotion then burst forth. Tears streamed from his swollen lids in rivulets. He cast himself on the ground, praying, recalling all his past life, and asking himself what crime he had committed that he, still so young, was thus punished. The day passed thus. He scarcely tasted food. At times he sat wrapped in thought. At times he walked around and round the cell like a wild beast in its cage. One thought in particular tormented him, namely, that during his journey hither he had sat so still, whereas he might, a dozen times, have plunged into the sea, and, thanks to his powers of diving, for which he was famous, have disappeared beneath the water, eluded his keepers, have gained the shore, concealed himself until the arrival of a Genoese or Spanish vessel, and escaped to Spain or Italy, where Mercedes could have joined him. He had no fears as to how he would live. A good seaman are welcome everywhere. He spoke Italian like a Tuscan, and Spanish like a Castilian. He would then have been free and happy with Mercedes and his father, for his father must come too, whereas he was now confined in the Chateau D'If, ignorant of the future destiny of his father and Mercedes. And all this because he had trusted to Villefort's promise. The thought was maddening, and Dante threw himself furiously down on his straw. The next morning the jailer made his appearance. "Well," said the jailer, "are you more reasonable today?" Dante made no reply. "Come, take courage. Do you want anything in my power to do for you?" "I wish to see the governor." "I have already told you it was impossible." "Why so?" "Because it is not allowed by the rules." "What is allowed then?" "Better fare, if you pay for it, books, and leave to walk about." "I do not want books. I am satisfied with my food, and I do not care to walk about, but I wish to see the governor." "If you worry me by repeating the same thing, I will not bring you any more to eat." "Well then," said Edmond, "if you do not, I shall die of famine, that is all." The jailer saw by his tone he would be happy to die, and as every prisoner is worth 6 pence a day to his jailer, the man, after reflecting on the loss of his death would cause him, replied in a more subdued tone, "What you ask is impossible. Do not ask it again. The governor never comes to a prisoner's cell, but if you are very well behaved, you will be allowed to walk about, and some day you will meet the governor. You can ask him, and if he chooses to reply, that is his affair." "But," asked Dante, "how long shall I have to wait?" "Ah, a month, 6 months, a year." "It is too long time." "I wish to see him at once." "Ah," said the jailer, "do not always brood over what is impossible, or you will be mad in a fortnight." "You think so?" "Yes, they all began this way. We have an instance here. It was by always offering 1,000,000 of francs to the governor for his liberty that the abbé who was in this chamber before you became mad." "How long has he left it?" 2 years. "Was he liberated then?" "No, he was put in a dungeon." "Listen," said Dante, "I am not an abbé. I am not mad. Perhaps I shall be, but at present, unfortunately, I am not. I will make you another offer." "What is that?" "I do not offer you 1,000,000, because I have it not, but I will give you 100 crowns if, the first time you go to Marseille, you will seek out a young girl named Mercedes at the Cantillons and give her a letter. No, not even a letter, just 2 lines for me. If I took them and were detected, I should lose my place, which is worth 2,000 francs a year, so that I should be a great fool to run such a risk for 300. "Well," said Dante, "mark this. If you refuse to tell the governor that I wish to speak with him, if you refuse at least to tell Mercedes I am here, I will some day hide myself behind the door, and when you enter I will dash out your brains with this stool." "Threats!" cried the jailer, retreating and putting himself on the defensive. "You are certainly going mad. The abbé began like you, and in 3 days you will want a straight waistcoat. But fortunately there are dungeons here." Dante whirled a stool round his head. "Oh," said the jailer, "you shall see the governor at once." "That is right," returned Dante, dropping the stool and sitting on it as if he were in reality mad. The jailer went out, and returned in an instant with a corporal and 4 soldiers. "By the governor's orders," said he, "conduct the prisoner to the story beneath." "To the dungeon, then," said the corporal. "Yes, we must put the madman with the madman." The soldiers seized Dante, who followed passively. He descended 15 steps, and the door of a dungeon was opened, and he entered, murmuring, "He is right, the madman with the madman." The door closed, and Dante advanced with outstretched hands until he touched the wall. He then sat down in the corner until his eyes became accustomed to the darkness. The jailer was right. Dante wanted but little of being utterly mad.